I used to read horror stories the way people watch storms through a window, close enough to feel something, far enough to stay safe. Late at night, screen glowing, room silent, I let fear brush against me without ever letting it inside. Stories always ended. That was the comfort. No matter how dark they became, they stopped. That night, when I reached the final line of a short horror story, something felt unfinished. The fear didn't fade the way it usually did. At the bottom of the page, after the ending, was a line I didn't remember seeing before. It wasn't part of the story. It wasn't a comment. It was a dedication. It said it was for me. I told myself it was coincidence. Stories break rules all the time. Writers like to be clever. Still, the feeling followed me into the next night, and the next story. Different website. Different author. Different tone. But the same ending. A quiet line, sitting alone beneath the final paragraph, waiting to be noticed. For you. I checked comments. No one mentioned it. I refreshed the page. It didn't change. I closed the app and stared at the dark screen, suddenly aware of how silent the room had become. Coincidences didn't feel like this. Coincidences didn't feel intentional. When I saw my full name for the first time, fear finally found its voice. It was spelled perfectly. First name. Last name. No errors. No hesitation. It wasn't hidden or stylized. It was simply there, as if it had always belonged at the end of the story. I refreshed. I opened the page on another device. Logged out. Private browser. Every time, the ending waited for me. Only for me. I asked people. Friends. Group chats. I sent screenshots, circled the ending, tried to explain why my hands were shaking. They didn't see it. To them, the stories ended normally. No dedication. No name. That was when I understood something deeply wrong. This wasn't public. It wasn't shared. It was personal. The stories weren't changing. They had been written this way. All along I don't remember choosing the book. I only remember holding it. An old horror anthology from a dusty shelf, its pages brittle, its cover cracked with age. At home, I turned straight to the last story, afraid and certain at the same time. The final page wasn't printed. It was handwritten. And it ended with my name. The ink was faded, as if it had been waiting longer than I had been alive. Once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. The stories all followed the same shape. A slow tightening. A sense of being watched. A realization that the danger wasn't moving anymore, it was already where it needed to be. And then the ending. Not as a threat. Not as a warning. But as a conclusion. My name didn't feel added. It felt inevitable. I searched for explanations until morning light filled the room. Old forums. Archived posts. Half-deleted discussions. A recurring phrase appeared again and again. The last reader. A myth about stories that didn't end until they reached the right person. Most people mocked it. Called it nonsense. Fiction layered on fiction. One post simply said. The story ends when it reaches you. The account that wrote it was gone. The world started to feel thin. Sounds lagged slightly behind movement. Reflections seemed reluctant. My shadow once hesitated before following me. I stopped reading horror entirely, but the words kept finding me anyway. Lines appeared in ads. In captions. In places they didn't belong. Almost there. I didn't remember reading that one. I dreamed I was inside a story. Not reading it, living it. The world felt constrained, like it ended just beyond my vision. When I tried to remember how I arrived there, the memory skipped, as if a page had been torn out. Above me, words formed in the air. Final chapter. I woke up gasping, convinced something had almost finished. I tried to drown it out. Noise. People. Daylight. But silence kept slipping through. In those moments, I felt examined. Not watched, read. Like a sentence waiting to be interpreted. That was when I understood. Fear wasn't the point. Completion was. I decided to fight back. I wrote my own story. Something harmless. Ordinary. No dread. No darkness. I ended it clearly. Safely. The end. When I scrolled down, my chest tightened. The ending had changed. My name replaced the words I had written. The stories weren't about monsters. They were about endings. They were about something reaching the point where it could go no further on its own. Every story needed an ending. And every ending needed someone to receive it. I wasn't cursed. I was necessary. People around me began to feel unfinished. Conversations looped. Days blurred. Faces lost detail, like background characters that hadn't been fully written. Streets repeated themselves. Reality was starting to read like fiction. And I was running out of pages. One night, a new story appeared. No title. No author. Just text. It described someone who believed they were separate from the narrative, until the narrative noticed them. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. I knew what waited at the bottom. The story explained that endings weren't conclusions. They were transfers. That once the final reader was reached, the boundary dissolved. The reader didn't disappear. They continued the story. As it. There was no dedication this time. Only a single sentence. And now, the story continues as you. My thoughts aligned. Memories broke into fragments. Fear sharpened into punctuation. I felt myself thinning, formatting, settling into place. My name wasn't being written anymore. It was being replaced. Somewhere else, someone opened a horror story late at night. The room was quiet. The screen glowed. They felt safe. The story waited. They reached the end, heart pounding, expecting relief. Their finger hovered. They scrolled. And they saw a name. Not mine. If this feels different, it's because it is. If it lingers longer than the others, there's a reason.